Hey guys, Julianne here with Far Out Tiny Homes. We always get asked, where can I park my tiny home? Stay tuned and we'll let you know how. When it comes to parking your tiny home, I bet you have a ton of questions. The number one question we get asked with every single phone call is, where can I legally park my tiny home? This has become a huge issue within the tiny home movement itself as we move forward to legalize. So where can you park your tiny home? The question seems simple enough, but there are a few factors that you need to consider in order to move forward. The first consideration we want you all to think about is, are you looking for a short-term stay to be more mobile with your tiny home, or are you looking for a long-term stay? Now, depending on what you answer, that's going to lead you in a certain direction. So let's consider short-term stay options first. When you're looking at short-term stays for your tiny home, maybe it's a week, maybe it's a couple months, but it's definitely nothing longer than 6 months. I would say your best bet to find parking tonight would be to start calling around to RV parks. A lot of them will accept tiny homes and they have the correct amenities and the easy hookups for your tiny home. The other option is to consider private campgrounds. Sometimes these private campgrounds will let a tiny home that is not RV certified stay, and then you just have to work it out with the owner. There's a bunch of different apps I'll link in the description that can help you find parking tonight. Now let's consider long-term stays for tiny homes. This is a stay that's anywhere from 4 to 6+ months. You're looking to really plant some roots, be in a place for a while, and get to know the community. With that, we do have 3 options. We still have the RV park community, manufactured home communities, and obviously the one that everyone is after, which is the tiny home community. You need to consider your options for all 3 and decide which one is going to work best for you. Okay, now let's discuss container homes. This is a little bit different, as you're more than likely not going to be looking for short-term parking for your container home, as generally you can't move it yourself. Even if you do put it on a trailer, generally speaking, you're still going to need a semi to move with how heavy the home is. So we're going to consider only long-term parking stays for container homes. Now, the first option you really need to keep in mind is the length of your container home. Now, they're all 8 feet standard width, and a high cube is a little bit more height than a standard container, but generally speaking, those measurements don't conflict with the rules and regulations in certain communities. But what you really need to consider is that total length. So the longer that you make your home, the harder it is going to be to find placement. The reason being is a lot of these manufactured home communities have regulations around the perimeter of the home. They also have stipulations with how you can place your home on the parcel once it's been delivered. So for example, when we moved into our first tiny home community, which was actually a manufactured home community with a couple different tiny homes in the neighborhood, we tried to park our tiny home at an angle because we wanted to make sure that we had a smaller front yard but a bigger backyard. Well, as we were setting up, in comes the manager saying, hey, sorry, you can't do that. That layout that you've designed right there is going to get the fire marshal called on us. You have to be, in line with the street, and you have to have, X amount of feet. I think it was 5 feet around the whole perimeter of the home. And this is just to make sure that ER personnel can get in the home in case there is an emergency. Okay, great. So you've decided whether you're going to be parking a tiny home or a container home. You understand whether it's going to be a short-term stay or if it's going to be a long-term stay. Now let's get into the costs associated with, moving the tiny home and setting up specifically the tiny home. So when you're moving both the container and the home on wheels, you're going to need to make sure that you have your transportation costs covered. And also with the container home, sometimes you do need to rent a crane in order to lift the container home onto the flatbed. So take that into consideration when you're budgeting for this move, especially if this is your first time. Generally speaking, around the Las Vegas area, we spend about $250 to about $350 $25 an hour to move the crane. Now, that cost also has to include drive time for the driver going from their yard to our yard and then back again. So generally speaking, we're looking at renting a crane operator for about 4 to 5 hours. Now, we're a little bit out of town, so that does obviously make that price go up, but just keep that in mind as you're doing your research. So now let's talk about transporting your tiny home on wheels. We use a great resource called uship.com. Anybody can use this resource and it is super simple. Basically what you do is you're going to go onto uship.com, you're going to create a profile, and then you're going to set up the shipment specifications on your profile. And basically what this is going to do is it's going to put it out into the Uship forums that, hey, I need my tiny home moved. These are the dates that I need it moved. These are the measurements and the weights of the tiny home. What do you got for me? And basically what you're going to get back is a wide array of folks saying, hey, I can bid that job. This is how much. This is when I'm available. You just want to make sure that whomever you do decide to employ to move your tiny house is licensed, bonded, and insured. You want to make sure that your investment is kept in good hands while in transit. Now, the second option is to rent a truck from Enterprise. This is a really inexpensive way to move your tiny home yourself if you have towing experience. That way you don't have that $60,000 price tag of buying a big, 1-ton truck just to move your tiny home maybe once every couple of years. The rental process is really straightforward. You got to let them know exactly what you're towing, where you're going, and you do have to return the truck back to the original place you rented it from. So unlike when you rent a car from Enterprise and you can just drive from point A and to point B and drop it off at point B, that's not how they work. You do have to return the car. Now, with that in mind, there is a service where they will take the truck from wherever you rented it or wherever the destination was, and they will return it for you. You can expect to pay about $500 to $1,000 for them to return it for you, but if you're going across the country and you don't want to make that drive all the way back there and all the way back again, it's definitely worth it. We actually did that the first time we drove across country with the Blue Baloo. It was the only way that we could really get it from point A to point B and not have to go all the way back to Kansas City again just to drop off the truck. So that resource is available for you. Okay, so now let's discuss the costs associated with setting up the tiny home or the container home. So with the container home, you're already aware that there might be some costs associated with the crane lifting the container home from the flatbed truck onto your parcel of land, okay? So moving forward from that, you're also going to need, specifically with the container home, to consider how you're going to hook up to electric, whether your container home is plug and play, which is basically wired for a 30 to 50 amp breaker, so you're able to plug one end in with your 30 to 50 amp cord and then plug the other one end. Generally, that's how they're set up, but sometimes they're a little different. Also, you're going to need to consider your plumbing for your container home. Maybe you're going to be hooking up to septic, maybe you're going to be hooking up to city sewer. Just know what you're getting yourself into before you make those plans to commit to that specific parcel. So now let's consider the cost for setting up a tiny home. So a tiny home is a little bit different, a little more intricate, and a few more steps. So once that tiny home has been delivered, you're going to want to set the tiny home. We recommend setting the tiny home on cinder blocks filled with concrete on all the corners and center supports as well, or purchasing jacks. Now these jacks, you have to make sure that they are the correct load weight, but you can get them from, say, Harbor Freight for pretty inexpensive, maybe $25 to $50 a jack. Again, you will need to support all four corners and some sort of center support in the middle of the tiny home trailer. You want to make sure that you're getting the weight off the axles and wheels and the tires. We don't want all of that weight just sitting down on the trailer. It's really not good for it. So to promote the longevity of your tiny home, get that weight off. Another little tidbit of information, kind of a little golden nugget, is dig out, once you have your home set up, whether it's on cinder blocks or jacks, dig out some of that dirt from underneath the tire. This is going to make your house set more firmly down on the base. If you leave some of that weight on the tire, you're gonna have a little bit of that bouncy effect when you're walking around in your tiny home. So just kind of dig a little bit of dirt out from underneath all the tires, and that should eliminate that funkiness in the home. Now, moving on to skirting the home. We always recommend to skirt your tiny home, not only to keep critters and spiders out from underneath, but also to keep a little bit of warmth underneath the trailer during winter. Those tiny home floors can get super, super cold. So you want to make sure that you are keeping the wind draft kind of away from the bottom of the tiny home. We also recommend spraying, and I know this sounds kind of nasty, a pesticide underneath, or putting in some diatomaceous earth underneath your tiny home, just to make sure that you are going to be pest free and you don't get any gnarly families living underneath. So here in Las Vegas, we actually have camel spiders. Yeah, they are horrifying. They're something straight out of a freaking movie. And they get like, I mean, I'm sure you've seen some of the pictures. If you just Google camel spiders, check them out. They're nasty, but they get huge. The biggest one I saw this year was about that big, and I almost cried. So we just recommend, if you have some gnarly critters or some gnarly insects where you're at, do a little bit of preventative care and make sure that that's kind of taken care of so your home is pest free. Now let's talk tiny home sewer requirements. So setting up the sewer is super simple. Generally, you're going to take your outlet sewer, connect it to their inlet sewer with a black pipe. You can buy this pipe from Lowe's. It's super inexpensive. You might have to get a couple elbows depending on where your sewer inlet is located on your property. But just make sure when you're planning your layout of parking your tiny home on that parcel that you're somewhat close to that, because you don't want to have this crazy like Mario and Luigi like pipe configuration going through your excuse me, going through your parcel. The other thing to consider is the exhaust pipe. So this might be some really weird terminology that you're not familiar with, but basically there's an additional pipe that raises up from the sewer that helps to exhaust all the smell, and you want that sucker high in the air. So we made our first mistake of only putting our exhaust sewer pipe about 5 feet above the ground, and every time we hung out outside, we're like, why the heck does it smell so bad out here? Well, duh, we had to put that exhaust pipe higher than the tiny house so it didn't come in the windows on the second story, so within our loft space, and we didn't have to smell it when we were out on our patio, you know, enjoying our tiny house, or well, the exterior of our tiny house. So now let's discuss the electrical setup. It should be super straightforward. Either you're a plug and play or you're a hardwire install. If you're a hardwire install, you need to get a certified electrician to set you up, but generally speaking, with most tiny homes, they are between a 30 to 50 amp service. I know for our tiny homes, that's where we like to keep them, so folks can easily go from, you know, one community to the next and have that same setup. So generally speaking, again, you want to park that tiny home as close to that electrical box as you possibly can. So when you're designing your layout, keep the plumbing in mind and the electrical in mind, because those 30 or 50 amp cords are super expensive. Now, we do recommend keeping that cord protected, whether you're putting it inside pipe or you're burying it in the ground, but try to keep that pipe under something, rocks, whatever. It's out here in the desert. We have such severe sunlight, so we have to protect every little element that's exposed. So just depending on where you're at, just keep that in mind. Have a little bit of budget left to hide the cord, okay? So you received a ton of information today on how to park your tiny home, where to park your tiny home, and the costs associated with moving and parking your tiny home. We know this was a ton of information, so we put together a guide for you that's going to make it super simple. These are actionable steps that will literally walk you through the process. You can find the guide in the description with a little link, and basically it's just going to take you to our website, and the guide will be available. It is going to have a little bit more information in it than we discussed today, including a state-by-state breakdown of where you can legally park your tiny home right this this minute. So the guide is super useful. Now, if you're finding this content useful to you and helpful, please give us that thumbs up. It really helps generate movement on the video to get this in front of other people, because you know, it's all about making this movement move, the tiny home movement. So do your part, share our video, like our video, and subscribe. We're gonna have weekly content coming out every single Thursday, so stay tuned. We hope you have a great day, guys, and keep it groovy.